Growing up, I enjoyed Ghostbusters 2 as much as the first movie. As I got older, I started to have some issues with it, and taking a quick look at some ratings online, it looks like I'm not the only one. My biggest problem with this movie is that it reuses the plot of the first movie. We spend about as much time watching the team form as we did in the previous film. One of the good guys gets possessed by the bad guy, some jerk in a suit wants to shut down the team, the dude who has a crush on Dana is a pawn of the bad guy, with all of this climaxing with the fate of New York City on the line. Now, obviously, in a sequel, you're going to have some common elements from the previous film. Batman stops a bad guy who poses a threat to Gotham City. Well, duh. Some of this I could forgive, but I really don't like that everyone in New York City suddenly doesn't believe in ghosts and sues the Ghostbusters into bankruptcy. What do you call that? Did the Ghostbusters put hallucinogens in the water supply? Actually, if they had said something like that, I might have been okay with that as an explanation. Sure, human beings have this frustrating talent for willful stupidity, so some people saying they don't believe in the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, I could buy that. But an entire city turning on the Ghostbusters? I don't know, guys, that doesn't fly with me. So before I give you guys a peek at the good stuff, a lot of people have complaints about Ghostbusters 2, the 2016 movie, and the trailer for the upcoming movie, and the consistent complaint is it's not funny. Now, I should say, when I was a kid, I didn't watch Ghostbusters for funny. To me, they were kind of like the superheroes I liked. I lumped 60s Batman, The Tick, and Ghostbusters all in with more serious stuff like Batman the Animated Series or Gargoyles, and I didn't see much difference in tone. I think even now, if they did a more serious Ghostbusters thing that utilized what's been established in this world and wasn't as funny, I'd be okay with that. But I know some people feel the humor is crucial, so I just want to say I don't consider myself to be funny. When I try to say or do something funny, even the crickets are so embarrassed they don't make any noises. So just laying out a plot for what I think Ghostbusters 2 should have done, I'm not going to be pitching jokes for you guys. A lot of what was funny in the first movie was dry humor and isn't as funny if you explain it to someone. And then the bookshelf fell, and Venkman asked Ray, "This happened to you before?" And it's funny because it hasn't happened to him before. See, that doesn't have the same effect as watching it on screen. So if you come at the Ghostbusters as a comedy, don't come at this video with that same mindset. Just assume if this plot had been given the green light, someone actually funny would have punched it up with lots of humor in the script writing stage. So my version of Ghostbusters 2. 5 years later, the team is disbanded. Not because the entire city caught a case of the Scullies, but because supernatural activity has screeched to a near halt. I got the impression in the first movie they were so busy because of the rise in Gozer-related phenomena, and with Gozer destroyed, there might be occasional ghost-related stuff, but not enough to justify the entire team staying in business full-time 5 years later. Peter Venkman is the most okay with the group disbanding, as he and Dana are now living together and have a son. This allows Venkman's character to take a different trajectory than what he did in the previous film. That's something I wanted to go for, having each character do something different, so that we're not just rehashing the first movie with a few minor changes. In the first movie, while Egon and Ray were the brains of the operation, Venkman was the heart and soul. I don't think the other two would have become Ghostbusters without Venkman pushing for it, but here, he's got a new life, and with paranormal activity down to a nearly complete stop, he's okay with the Ghostbusters being a thing in the past, and him being more of a family man and less of a shameless flirt is something new and different for Murray to play with, kinda like Tony Stark in Avengers Endgame, though you may not believe this, I have been toying with doing this video for a long time, before I was even regularly doing fix videos like I do, and I had this idea of Venkman being retired and happily settled down, so the similarities to Iron Man are purely coincidental. Winston Zeddemore is still very much trying to keep the team alive. Look at what we had in the movie we got. The other guys have lives outside of busting ghosts. Venkman has his talk show, Ray runs a bookstore, and Egon is doing lab research on kids with puppies. But we only see Winston doing party gigs. Him being the new heart and soul of the team is good, because in the previous movie, this was just a paycheck to him. Even in jail, Winston said he wanted his own lawyer. But over time, Winston began to believe in what they were doing. While the Twinkie of ghost activity isn't the size of a bus anymore, there's still a Twinkie, so he's the kid sticking his finger in the hole in the dam. Egon and Ray might help him out when they're not busy, but like in the movie, they've got other things occupying their time. Maybe you could have some other new Ghostbuster helping Winston, since everyone else is doing their own thing. Someone who is pretty young, like 18 or 19, and was in awe of the team during their heyday. A counter to how Winston was in the first movie. This kid loves the team and probably isn't even getting paid, but is happy to help whenever Winston does get a call. With Ray, I'd actually want him to be doing what Venkman did in the movie we got. He doesn't have the showmanship to carry a show that people would enjoy watching, but with the clout he has from being one of the heroes who saved the city 5 years ago, he has managed to put together a really crappy 1 a.m. show where he argues for the existence of the supernatural with skeptics. While the team isn't completely reviled and mocked into retirement, some people still think they are frauds, so Ray is out there trying to get people to wake up. This is also different from how he was portrayed in the previous movie, since he was the one with the childlike wonderment and enthusiasm. Now he's disillusioned and disgusted with how things turned out, but deep down he still still has a glimmer of that optimism because he is still making an effort and trying to reach through to people. You could also say he's having some financial trouble since he had to mortgage his parents' house to start the business in the first movie. That could contribute to him being in a darker place. Maybe he's living at the firehouse all the time, so we can still have some character interactions, even though he wouldn't be as committed to the ghostbusting as Winston is. And this way, if Winston does encounter something fishy, while Ray is over here trying to sleep, he can help Winston with the science part, even though he won't be going out in the field most of the time. Eventually, I would want to lighten up Ray and have him be a little closer to how he acted in the first movie, but this would be mostly to take advantage of the 5-year jump and show things are very different now. With Egon, I like him diving further into his research. He's not exactly a Vulcan, but he's not really torn up about how things turned out after the team broke up. He was in it for the science then, and he's in it for the science now. It's just in a different form. Janine is his personal assistant or secretary, however you want to label it. Maybe she's trying to go through grad school or something, and this is helping pay some of the bills, or so she says. Maybe she still carries a torch for Egon. It was really weird how she and Lewis got together, so that's a no-go here. She could be like Newt Scamander's assistant in Crimes of Grindelwald, but she doesn't completely disappear 5 minutes into the movie. Speaking of Lewis, I'm not going to have him become a Ghostbuster at the end either. I don't think you have to have all of the characters from the previous movie return, and if you do, they don't have to have the same amount of screen time. For Lewis, he can have a scene near the beginning where he's talking to Winston saying he can bend some rules, but they are in trouble financially, so he needs to think about shutting down. Then maybe at the end, if the team is back together, Lewis can be there celebrating, talking business with Winston again, that sort of thing. And speaking of financial trouble, maybe Winston briefly considers selling off patents of the traps and the proton packs, but all the crew are strongly against that, even if they can't think of other ways Winston and Ray can keep paying the lease. I know I mentioned Iron Man earlier, but the government wanting to get in on the ghostbusting action was a thing in the previous movie, or at least they wanted to regulate it, so it makes sense to kind of borrow, or pre-borrow, since this movie would have been 21 years earlier, a little from Iron Man 2, with the government wanting in on the action, even with ghost activity down to a crawl. Maybe they think this stuff can be used in corporeal combat situations. That wouldn't be a big part of the movie, just a thing kind of going on in the background to show things are different. These guys might be well-liked heroes by some, but there's still just a few guys trying to make it work. Anyway, this allows for us to keep the basic structure of the movie we got, with a threat slowly looming and the team coming back together to face it. But in my opinion, the reason the team is disbanded makes more sense. I wouldn't want the Ghostbusters to be angry with each other or anything. They're all still friends, they get together for pizza once a week, but they're all at different points in their lives. They're getting older, and I'm getting older too. Speaking of looming threats, I'm pretty okay with the villain we had and his scheme to return to this world. Much like the movie, Vigo will want to reincarnate in the body of Oscar. Why? Throw in some hibbity-jibbity about how Dana and Venkman are both inundated with ghostly particles, making their offspring ideal to host the energies of Vigo. Dana was saturated by Gozerian particles when she turned into a dog, and Venkman, in all his time combating ghosts and being near the trap in the firehouse, also absorbed all that stuff. So when Oscar is kidnapped near the end of the second act, Venkman comes to the others and says, "Let's go save my son." This should be the heck yeah moment, like them putting on their proton packs and catching the Scoleri brothers in the movie we got. Venkman was the one resisting returning to his old life, so when he's ready to get back in the Ecto-1, then it's time for the audience to fist pump. Instead of Dana's boss being the guy who kidnaps Oscar, you could say there's a cult that worships Vigo, and they've been planning his return for centuries. And Twist, the kid who's been helping Winston, is a follower of Vigo, and he's the one who kidnaps Oscar. He was with Winston this whole time, learning how to disable their proton packs and maybe try to lock out their access to the trap in the basement, so they will be helpless to defend humanity when Vigo opens the portal to some long-forgotten ancient realm of darkness. And I'd want to explore a little more of the mythos behind Vigo. We know he was 105 years old when he was murdered, but we don't really know much about him other than he was some kind of tyrant in Europe. I'd want to kind of touch on the flavor of the supernatural stuff you see in H.P. Lovecraft stories. I have a confession to make. I hate H.P. Lovecraft's works. Every one of them I've tried to read. I wanted to throw it into a deep chasm where it could never return. But a lot of the mythos he built in his work, like ancient alien gods imprisoned beneath the ocean and they have telepathy to drive you insane or something, that stuff has always sounded really cool to me. So without actually making it obvious that that's what you're doing, I would want to say Vigo is some kind of worshiper of those types of entities, and maybe he had an extended lifespan because he promised to open this portal to their evil landscape if they would make him an intermediary between the rest of humanity and his masters. It's not much, but it's a little more than the movie gave us. Until Winston's partner kidnaps Oscar at the end of the second act, it'd be a little difficult to pad out the movie's runtime. I wouldn't want Pink Slime attacking baby Oscar because then you know the bad guy is after Peter and Dana's baby, and I'd want that to come as a surprise when it actually happens. But without the pink slime, you need something for the guys to be investigating that slowly merges their subplots together. Instead of an overt ghost activity montage like in both movies that we got, it could be more of a subtle detective story where Ray, Winston, and Egon are investigating separate threads that all lead together by the end of Act 1. Then they continue their investigation with things starting to ramp up in a way that the rest of society still isn't noticing, and then things culminate with Venkman's kid getting kidnapped. I wouldn't want there to be a big yes, we're back moment in this one. You can have them be active but not superstars again, as by this point they're beyond that. It's personal for them, they don't have time for stardom. Something I never gave much thought to is the team using the paranormal goop to animate the Statue of Liberty and how that flies in the face of how they did things in the previous movie. It was in the Red Letter Media review of the first Ghostbusters movie that Rich Evans talked about how the team uses science to combat the supernatural, and using the supernatural to combat the supernatural, that's antithetical to the way the team operated in the first movie. So I wouldn't do the Statue of Liberty thing, although if they did that, I guess it would be really difficult for people to dispute the paranormal in a potential Ghostbusters 3. Yeah, maybe they put LSD in the water supply when we all collectively saw the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, but we're still seeing the Statue of Liberty standing here. So instead of the museum, which in my fix, Dana is still part of an orchestra, I guess it is possible to go from one extreme career to the next. My last 2 jobs were completely different from each other, but they only changed her from flautist to painter so that we could work in a painting of Vigo. But you can just open a portal and summon his spirit like you did in the previous movie. So the cultists have baby Oscar, and they've returned to the apartment building from the previous movie. You might think that's a lazy way of cashing in on nostalgia from the previous film, but I would say they choose to summon Vigo here because, again, lots of ghostly energy residue where Gozer first manifested. We've already set that explanation up with why Oscar was chosen to be the new host, so I think this would work. The Ghostbusters bust in, they somehow close the portal and save the baby. Maybe if you wanted to do a sequel hook, which I don't think Bill Murray was interested in doing more Ghostbusters after this, but if you really wanted to, you could say the Ghostbusters weren't able to completely close the portal, so there will be more of a steady stream of supernatural activity now, and they will have to keep a larger roster active to combat the oncoming threat. This way, you could lean into Dan Aykroyd's original idea that there are multiple teams of Ghostbusters, like firefighters, but that would be in the third movie. And this way, you could gently phase out Venkman since he has a family and Bill Murray didn't want to be tied down to one role for the rest of his life. Though I don't know if audiences would care about a Ghostbusters movie with most of the crew, but not Venkman. I think I would have been less interested. And that's about it. I still like Ghostbusters 2. I don't hate it like some people do, but I think it is flawed, and maybe I'm biased, but I think this video addresses most of those flaws. But what do you guys think? Like it? Hate it? Let me know in the comments, and I do these videos all the time, so come back next week to see what else I will be doing. And I do other kinds of videos as well, so watch those while you wait for whatever I fix next. Until next time, have a good one.